I'm really, I'm going to hit record because you never know what you're going to get when you're setting up. Sometimes the best stuff is when you're initially are setting up. But, I'm glad that we finally got a chance to sit down and talk. Our first conversation was about 2 years ago?
Yeah, maybe more.
Back then I just started the podcast, and Marine veteran Rick Robinson, who was one of my mentors, he said, I'll put you in touch with Sergeant Major Canley. When I first started the podcast, he's like, but first you need to talk to John Ligato first.
Yeah. You're not going to believe it, but Sergeant Major Canley's coming here and spending 2 weeks with me tomorrow.
Oh, really? What are you guys doing?
Well, he asked me to write his biography. I wrote the book, The Gunny, which was a snapshot in Vietnam at Way, but I'm doing his whole biography now.
I didn't know that you were an author. It's funny because I was in Quantico's PX about a week ago, and I knew this interview was coming up, and I knew a little bit about you, but I didn't know that you wrote his, books on Sergeant Major Canley until I was in the PX and I saw it like right there in front of me. They had it on display and everything. So that was kind of cool. And also in reading in your bio, I didn't know that you were a professor now with Campbell University on Camp Lejeune. I took some basics at Campbell on Lejeune on my journey to my bachelor's back in the day.
Oh, it's so wonderful. I'll tell you, I taught at a community college in Cleveland for 9 years. And I come up here, in Cleveland's an inner city, in a community college, you get people that could be in Harvard and people that shouldn't be in college at all. I had one kid arrested. The cops came in. And,
Oh my gosh.
But anyway, so I come up here and I walk in the class. And as you know, the class is all Marines, either active duty, retired, or whatever. And everybody stood up, and I looked around, and I thought, who came in? But the difference was night and day. The papers that their briefings. I would have them give briefings, and it were like professional briefings.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's it's a different breed of student on base than I guess you would at a local community college in Cleveland. Absolutely. John, the first question we always ask on Borne the Battle is when and where did you know that military service was going to be the next step in your life? And I say that in that way because I think, especially in your generation, it wasn't always a choice, right? So were you drafted or was it a choice?
No. In 1965, I was the first person in my large Italian family to get accepted to college.
Oh, wow.
In 1966, I was the first person in my large Italian family to get expelled from college. So back then, and I know you're too young, but 66, 67 especially, and 68, you had two deferments to avoid military. You had student and you had a medical. Unfortunately, I was in great shape. And as soon as you get expelled, they write a letter to your draft board to college saying you're eligible. So
very well.
So it was 30 days back then, 30 to 40 days. They needed bodies in 67. You were getting a draft notice. And so my father said, he was in World War II. He said, don't be a grunt, don't be an infantry. So I went to the Navy. They had a year waiting list. I went to the Air Force. They had a year and a half. So I get drunk with my buddy and I say, I don't want to go in the Army. So I joined the Marines so drunk. And I remember telling the recruiter, I don't want to go to Vietnam. I don't want to be like in the dirt. I don't want to be infantry. And back then, recruiters could say, which he said to me, he says, you're not going to Vietnam. You're not going to be in the infantry. I'm going to try to get you on embassy duty, to London or somewhere. So I signed the papers, and about 4.5 months later, I was a basic rifleman in Quang Tri, Vietnam.
Wow.
Best thing that ever happened to me, really. Best thing. In hindsight, it was. So I thank that recruiter.
Sure. No, absolutely. It's funny how you said that things that they did back then they can't do today.
Oh my God. I mean, there are guys still waiting for their gynecology MOSs,
Now I usually ask who was your best friend or your greatest mentors were while you were in, but I think for you, that's almost a foregone conclusion, right? With those that you served with in Way, Gunner Sergeant Canley, your platoon sergeant Al Gonzalez, both awarded the Medal of Honor. I'm sure many others,
Well, Ray
and I'm
Smith,
sure, and I'm
Etool
sure many
Smith.
others.
Yeah,
What's
I
that?
mean, Etool Smith, Ray Smith was a brand new second lieutenant. See, whenever I hear people complain about second lieutenants, and especially in Vietnam, they'll say they were with. I had the best leadership in Alpha Company. I didn't know it at the time because I had no comparative, I had no way of comparing leaders.
Yeah.
But my platoon sergeant was an E5, Al Gonzalez. The company gunny was John Canley. Uh, the company commander was Gordon Batchelor, a Navy Cross winner.
Wow.
And the three lieutenants were Ray Smith, uh, Rick Donnelly, and Al Courtney, all Navy Cross or Silver Star Navy Cross winners, and superb leaders.
Wow.
So when you look at leadership, I didn't know it at the time. We had two Medal of Honors in the first couple hours of the battle. We had no commissioned officers for 3 days, and you had this E7, who I had no idea that E7s are not normally company commanders. That's a captain's billet.
Yeah.
And his XO by default was an E5. And for 4 days, most of us were POCs, Lance Corporals. That was it. So we followed this gunny and his sergeant. Um, and the first 4 or 5 days at Hue City were epic, historical in nature.
Yeah. I've seen some interviews where you talked about Sergeant Major Canley, back then Gunner Sergeant Canley, and the way you talked about him was like how some other legit heroes were portrayed in film. I'm thinking of like Sergeant Major Plumley and We Were Soldiers, or Lieutenant Colonel McKnight in Black Hawk Down, who, in the films, they just stood up when bullets were flying and everyone else was hunkered down. And these two, these gentlemen like these never ducked or never got to the ground, and yet they were never shot.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not just me saying. When I interviewed
Yeah.
some of the guys I served with, you had 20, 30 guys not saying the same thing from one incident. In other words, they weren't all commenting on one. They were commenting on 30 different incidents where Gunny Canley would just stand there and calm. First of all, for a NCO, he never raised his voice. He never cursed. Here you got a hardened, combat guy. And when he got mad, he would talk lower, which really scared us.
He's one of those guys. Gotcha.
Oh, but what a leader! He loved his junior enlisted Marines. He wasn't too kicked in the butt with officers. He tolerated officers, but he loved his junior enlisted Marines.
Now Canley's still around today, and he recently received his Medal of Honor. But to keep all this in perspective, as we get older, Sergeant Gonzalez, when we use the word mentor, back then he was 21.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you learned from a mentor that was like Sergeant Gonzalez at that point in time?
He was a quiet, relatively quiet. The gunny was really quiet, but Sergeant Gonzalez sort of radiated confidence and leadership. And I was with him, both of them, when they got their Medal of Honor. What was funny, I'll tell you a funny story about that, is that Ray Smith came up on the fourth day, and as a second lieutenant with only 2 months in country, got command of Alpha Company. And they said, go meet Gunny Canley, because Gunny was the acting company commander. And so Ray meets Canley and says, listen, I want you to take third platoon. That was Gonzalez's platoon. And Canley says, Gonzalez got third platoon. So Ray Smith repeated it. No, he's kind of quiet. And he has, I don't know him. Well, you take it. And the gunny said, Gonzalez got third platoon, Lieutenant. And it dawned on Ray that Gonzalez has third platoon. And Canley finally said, if you want me to go up to third platoon and watch Gonzalez, I'll go do it. But he's got third platoon. And if I should be anywhere, Lieutenant, I might want to be with you. In other words, to keep an eye on it. And so Ray Smith has this, who was Major General Ray Smith has this great story where he says, my first act as a company commander was to try to relieve a Medal of Honor winner.
Outstanding. That's outstanding. So, there's a lot of media out there on Sergeant Major Canley and his Medal of Honor citation. But there's not much media that give the full operational overlay of what you experienced and what you witnessed that took place between January 31st and that first week in February in 1968. Do you mind giving, I guess, not even a 10,000 foot view, but maybe an operational view of what was taking place and what you witnessed at that time in history?
Yeah, in '67, I don't know. Compiègne was a fire base up by the DMZ. I mean, you could spit and hit the DMZ, and we took a lot of casualties. It was a horrible place. We were surrounded by two battalions of NVA. We were one battalion, and we had 300 to 400 rounds of mortars and rockets and artillery every day. So we got out of there. I mean, we took a bunch of casualties, and we went to Quang Tri and spent Christmas and New Year's. And Quang Tri was no picnic. I mean, it was up north, and we got in firefights, but it was nothing compared to Compiègne. So because we had got all shot up in Compiègne, they sent us to Fubai, which was a large Air Force base. And we were living underground in Compiègne, and we had dysentery, we had leeches, we lost weight. You can't imagine the conditions in Vietnam were similar to World War II in Korea.
Like Guadalcanal type. It sounds like type of.
We didn't get mail, and if we went out on a night ambush in a rice paddy, we didn't come back in. Those were the conditions. So they said, "You guys go up to Fubai, and we're going to give you good duty guarding." I forget what it was, but something at Hue City, the canal, or some good duty, because Hue City was a French city. It looked like New Orleans. I'd never seen anything like that. So the problem was that they could only airlift half of the company from Quang Tri to Fubai. And I was one of the lucky ones or unlucky ones to get airlifted. And the gunny was there, and we had one officer, which is Captain Batchelor, the company commander. So we're up there, and we get mortared and rocketed about midnight, which was nothing, back, because we were used to that from Compiègne. So it was 31 January 1968. We didn't know that was the Tet New Year. The Vietnamese New Year is called Tet. And what we didn't know is a nationwide effort to end the war by the North Vietnamese.
Yeah.
So what happens is our intelligence was bad. Task Force X-Ray, which was the 1st Marine Regiment task force at Fubai, wakes us up and says, "You're going to go into Hue City." The Captain Batchelor told us there's 2 undersized NVA battalions there wreaking havoc at the Citadel and the MACV compound, and you should be back by noon. So
that's how it was briefed, huh?
Well, you know what? It was briefed that way for 5 days. I mean, but answer your question, well, the intel was bad, but so we go and we have one officer, the gunny, and Al Gonzalez, and we go up, and on the road to Hue was Highway 1. And we get near the city, and we get attacked, snipers and all that, machine guns. It wasn't that bad. So we get our wounded, put them on. We met tanks, 5 tanks, and we were in trucks. So we took the wounded, started on north on Highway 1, and we go about a mile. We get hit hard from the left flank. Machine guns, rockets, more. The tanks, two or three tanks were taken out. I mean, I grabbed our radio man, Corporal Williams, and he got hit in the tank in front of us and dragged him into a courtyard. I looked down, he had no legs. I mean, it was that bad. So anyway, we Captain Batchelor gets hit. He runs out on the road to save a Marine. He throws his body over the Marine, and he gets hit with 4 AK rounds. Chunk of his left forearm was off, and a bullet severed his femur.
Wow.
And by that time, the corpsmen we had, I think, 2 corpsmen killed, or 1 corpsman killed. So the corpsman, Doc Kerr, who's phenomenal, gets an entrenching tool and makes a splint and saved Batchelor's leg, but he's out, he's gone. And So we move forward. The gunny takes command. He was the next commanding, highest rank. And we get near way, and then all of a sudden we get hit from the front with NVA machine guns. We get hit from the left flank with NVA machine guns, mortars, rockets, and to our right. Go ahead, you're going to ask.
Yeah, was this your just the company? Was it like what was
Well,
the
was
strength?
it,
What was your strength and what was the strength of the enemy?
That's a good question. I had always thought we had about 100, but I learned recently there was only about 70 or 80 of us because companies in Vietnam were undermanned. Anyway, I don't know, companies full strength might be 300. We're lucky if we had 200, 210, We were about 70 or 80 Marines.
Wow.
Going into the city, the enemy strength was two battalions. When we got into Hue City, and this is all documented, I know it's going to sound like an unreasonable number. There were 10,000 NVA troops in and around Hue City, just Hue City. They had captured the city that night, early in 3 a.m. So the two battalions, Bachelor's hit, he's thrown on a truck. We got dead and wounded mounting. The tanks are getting hit, but we have to move forward because the NVA cut off portions of Highway 1 back to Phu Bai. On our right flank was an open rice paddy. Now, if you can visualize, we're getting hit from the left, from the west flank. The east was an open rice paddy. Machine guns now.
Nowhere to run.
No, we were coming from the north, and we couldn't go south.
Wow.
So we were in this muddy ditch, which was filled with buffalo dung and just mud because it was in monsoons. And Marines are getting picked off. So Canley and Gonzalez, they direct some of us to fire at the northern positions. They jump into the rice paddies, the two of them. They had some law rockets, hand grenades, and they made their way. I don't know if you've seen rice paddies, but they're just mud sort of lumps filled with water on either side.
Yeah.
And they made their way within 20 to 30 yards of the machine gun positions north, firing law rockets. They eventually threw hand grenades and eliminated the 2 or 3 machine gun positions. I mean, a frontal assault on 2 machine guns. This allowed us to get into the city proper. And by then, half the company was dead or wounded. So when you say we had 70 or 80, 40 were dead or wounded.
Wow.
Yeah.
Undersized company to begin with. It's incredible.
Yeah. It really was. I mean, you don't have time now. Historically, I know these numbers. And back then, it was just chaos. I mean, all you heard was the smells and sounds of war are amazing. We have no air protection, and the smells of Vietnam. And then I learned one thing, that blood smells like copper. And it was this continuous loop of corpsman up. Unfortunately, there was one corpsman at that point. So guys were, doing the best we could. But we get into the city, and it was a lull in the fighting. So I'm thinking in my little teenage brain, hey, we made it. This is it. I'm alive, and my brothers are the one they're going to get to MACV or compound and be saved. And so we get into MACV compound, and it was Australians, Army, and a couple Marines, and they had been under siege. They had 3 breaches of their wall the night before.
Wow.
And it was amazing. They survived, but they did. We got in there, and we tried to take care of the wounded. There were no medevac choppers. That was the other thing. For 5 days of the battle, they would not give us air or artillery support because they said Hue was a historic city. And I mean, they didn't want to ruin it. I mean, it had cathedrals and stadiums and soccer. It was literally a French beautiful city. Yeah. So they wouldn't allow us to destroy it. So we were fighting 10,000 NVA man on man, with no. And they had captured the city the night before. They had been there weeks before the New Year celebration, infiltrating the city.
So you think about other battles like Ia Drang and some other ones where the air support was critical.
Yes.
And then there's Hue where there's literally no air support.
No, not literally none.
Yeah, none. Yeah.
Um, so for 4 or 5 days, 6 days, I don't know how it was. I think it might have been 10. It's in a documentary, but
Yeah.
absolutely for the first week or so, we had nothing. So we get into the MACV compound, and those people, we found them hiding under racks. They thought, they thought that we were there to save, which we were supposed to be, to save them. And I'm looking at them, and they're going to save us, and we didn't realize that we were the reinforcements. They expected, a couple of battalions of Marines. There's these 40 guys limping in, carrying their dead and wounded. And they're looking at us, and we're looking at them both like, okay, we're okay now. We got, um,
This
so,
is it.
yeah. So we
Wow.
did, we hadn't eaten anything. We remember we stole bologna sandwiches, and then we asked for more food, and they wouldn't give it, the army colonel or something. So we broke into their food supply, and we broke into their army. We took ammunition. The corpsmen broke in and got medical supplies because they didn't have any. Um,
Wow.
anyway, we're there, and um, we get word that Golf Company 25 is coming behind us to support us. So they arrived about an hour later and had some problems, but not as much problems as we did getting into the city. So Task Force X-Ray, in their wisdom, continues to say there's only two undersized NVA companies at way. We want you to cross the bridge, which separates North and South Vietnam, and go help this Arvin General Truong, who was the most famous general, uh, South Vietnamese general in Vietnam. And he is surrounded at the Citadel, which was a big fortress. So Alpha Company, you're going to be on the river, and you're going to support Golf Company. They're going to cross, and we're going to fire across the river, which was stupid anyway. The effective range of an M16 in 2000 or in 1968 was 300 yards. The river was like 340 yards. So we
Wow.
we yeah. So we're hitting the mud, we're hitting the water. But anyway, we get to the river, and I look across the river, and the first thing I see is a large NVA flag flying atop the Citadel. They had captured the Citadel. And then I see,
The trunk at this point is out of the fight.
yeah, oh,
Wow.
they captured the city. They owned every inch of the city except where we were, but they were all around us. And I look and I see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of NVA. And I remember thinking, well, we don't see NVA soldiers in Vietnam very rarely, especially just standing out there. And there were two battalions of NVA on the other side of the river.
Is there a point in the battle where you thought, I'm not getting out of this alive?
What do you mean? Was there a point?
Yeah, like well, I mean, I'm sure you thought about it many times. I'm sure it came up, but what point was the first point? Like this ain't gonna
Oh, of
work.
course, going in, it was a
Going
horrible
in.
day. I mean, there were so many. I mean, there was some funny stuff and um, on the first night, we occupied homes, French homes, and I had gone to Vietnamese language school for 30 days. I mean, I knew how to phrases like talk, give me a cigarette, you better talk. I don't know rather, but not much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's still quiet, which was, and it's pitch dark, and a little ambient moon, and we are in French homes, and other French homes are across the street, maybe 40 yards. And sometime in the middle of the night, I hear whoops and woo, you die, Marine, F you, Marine. And it took a while. I thought, well, the guys are not going to screw around like this. The NVA were across the street, across the street, and whooping it up. And I did think this is like a World War II movie, where they're on an island. It's the middle of the night, and you hear "Hello, Joe."
Wow.
So, anyways, Sergeant Gonzalez, we wanted to open up. He said, "No, they would have opened up by now. Let's wait." But they were screaming all night, and our tension raised our pucker factory.
Sure.
So Gonzalez tells me, he said, "The guy, you went to the language school. Say something back to them that will, cut the rhetoric down." And I didn't know, I can't say, "Hey, Twang, you got a cigarette? And I couldn't think of anything to say. And everybody's waiting for me to stop this. So I jumped into the doorway and screamed, F you, you effing, you know, and and all the guys started laughing, and that punctured the tension a little bit. And even the Vietnamese, I'm probably thinking, what was that trying?
That's amazing. That's amazing. You called 3 of those days of the battle, and I'm sorry if I cut you off, partway through the whole battle, the whole operational part of the battle. But you call 3 of those days the 3 missing days of Marine Corps history due to the nature of the battle. Why did you frame it in that way?
Well, we had Gonzalez, we had all enlisted men, and I don't know what the Marine Corps is like nowadays, but in the '60s, I mean, I was kicked out of college, joined the Marines, had no idea what medals were. I'd seen them, in movies and stuff, but none of us were interested, or interested is the wrong word. Maybe were aware of medals, that we could win medals. So if you take that out of the equation, we had no officers, and we had heroic acts being committed all around us. And the problem was, Gunny Canley wrote up Gonzalez for his Medal of Honor, but Gonzalez died on 4 February. So now you have an E7 and a bunch of 18-year-old PFCs and Lance Corporals, most of whom were either medevaced, killed, rotated, had their 3rd Purple Heart, were hardly decimated. By the time we left the city 31 days later, only 7 Marines who entered that city left unbloodied. So we're scattered to the winds. We're scattered to the wind. I got wounded.
Wow.
I got wounded on the 21st, got medevac. And
out of a company of Marines, 7 ended up without a Purple Heart.
Oh, yeah, only 7. I mean, there could have been thousands. Guys were getting wounded all the time and wouldn't.
Wow.
I can remember I got hit with a piece of shrapnel in the chest, and my buddy Carangio got his K-bar and flicked it out, and that was it. I mean, but not just me. Guys were walking around with bullet wounds that they never, and refused to either get medevac or couldn't get medevac. So it was all of us had bandages. We looked, greasy, bloody bandages, all of us. The wounded who couldn't fight were loading magazines and handing it to the guys that could. It was amazing. So why I called it that is that there was no social media, in 1968, 69.
Yeah.
We just left. We had no way of contacting each other. And so years later, when we gathered, we all started talking about the gunny, did this, did that. And I realized that those 4 or 5 days without officers were not documented. Nothing. I mean, nothing. Other than, hey, Gunny was a brave dude, But
yeah.
So I started taking statements, and it hit me that we had 3 missing days where this guy, a Medal of Honor, and also the other guys. If you read the book, The Gunny, did you read it?
I didn't. I haven't read it yet. No, absolutely. No, I would love to.
Yeah, I interviewed these guys that I love and were with, but you only see war through your eyes. And I realized these guys were heroes. I mean, my friends, little Larry Lewis looked 12. I looked 13. He looked 12. The helmet didn't even fit. And, Larry's charging fortified NVA house. He jumps through the window. He engages. I never knew this. Nobody wrote it out. And there's story after story about that. And so none of this was documented. So I started documenting, and the Gunny was the first individual that had the greatest, I don't want to say, I don't want to use the word unfairness. It wasn't unfair that he didn't get a medal. It was just not documented.
Circumstances of the battle.
Yeah. So, it took me 13 years to get him the medal. 13 years of bureaucratic BS.
Sure.
Let me give you one quick example. It gets rejected one time because I had to get an endorsement of every officer in the chain of command. It was 13. So I go to work, identify them all from the commandant on down to a platoon commander. 11 were dead. 2 were alive, was Ray Smith and Gordon Van Dorset. I get a call from the Navy Department and said, "Sir, I'm Ensign so-and-so." He says, "I have the packet. My job only is to see if it's complete. I have a checklist and I'm checking off, and there are 11 missing signatures." And I said, "No, the packet, that form was complete." And he said, "No, sir." He said, "My checklist says you have to have the signature of every officer in the chain of command. You have 11 missing." And finally, this went around. I said, "You realize they're dead?" And this ensign said, "Yes, sir. But there's still 11 missing signatures, and my checklist says." so, so people say, "Why did it take 13 years?"
It's the banging of the head of of stuff like that. Incredible. So you were, I guess, the impetus, the documentarian for that medal. What was it? I mean, there was a movie, Last Will Measure, that came out recently, and they that movie kind of documented what you're talking about, going around, getting all the first person accounts and things like that. That had to have been a journey in and of itself.
I was met with uncaring bureaucrats, incompetent bureaucrats, um, people that, first of all, I had to go through a congressperson. And I started with Gunny Canley's district. It was terrible. One congresswoman lost all the original paperwork, which set me back 2 years because I had to go get them all again. And, we're of an age, we're in our 70s now. And
yeah,
a couple guys just wrote it longhand. And to duplicate it took a year and a half. When it got down to it, the end, the Congress, I tried to talk to the congresswoman and I couldn't talk to her. I got low-level people. I said, "Could I talk to the chief of staff?" Because what happened, it was sat on the desk. They sent it to the wrong place. They sent it to the Department of Defense, where it sat for almost 2 years. And during those 2 years, I would call and say, "What's going on? We don't want to anger the congressional liaison. It'll come, it takes time." Finally, when I demanded, they said, "Oh, it's been in on the wrong desk. It's just sitting." Meanwhile, Gunny Canley is getting older. He's 83 now.
Is he really?
Yeah.
He doesn't look it. Doesn't look it at all.
No.
What kept you going? What kept your team going through 13 years?
I was angry. I got angry. And several times I gave up, and I never had the heart to tell them that it was done. I mean, lost paperwork, and I couldn't talk to anybody. At one point, I wanted to march on Congress with all the Vietnam vets, and somebody talked me down from the ledge. But I was just so angry because, I was in government 37 years. I'm a retired FBI agent.
Yeah.
I used to meet with assistant directors, anyway. And I'm thinking,
what does that medal mean now that it's in Canley's hand? What's it mean for you, for the men that were there at Way and saw everything that he did?
It's funny. He talks about it, that the medals are for his junior enlisted Marines. And that, what I've seen through the ceremony, and even now, when I see these guys, and when they're going to commission a ship for the Gunny. I don't know if you know that.
No, I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, they're commissioning some. We'll go all there during the commissioning, but to see these guys be recognized, because the Gunny always recognizes them. And like when we were with President Trump, he met just with us and the remaining guys from Alpha Company, and to see them, to me, it was worth it. It was because of what they did. I'm telling you, these guys are all heroes. I could tell you story after story. And the Gunny recognized that in war, you are totally dependent on those 18, 19-year-old. You're totally dependent on them. And if you think you're not, you won't last long in combat. And so the social distance between enlisted and officers in Vietnam or enlisted and seniors is minimal. I mean, don't get me wrong, we obeyed commands, but there was more love, there was more give and take.
There was a
Yeah.
camaraderie there.
Yeah.
Now you were medically discharged from was it from Vietnam? Was it from that particular battle? Was it from
Yeah.
Hue?
Yeah, I was I went through the Philippines, and then when I got, um, out of the hospital and out of medical care, I volunteered to go back. You had to sign a waiver if you had 3 Purple Hearts. And they said no because I had less than a year to go. My MOS was basic rifleman, and I couldn't even go back for a full tour. So they discharged me a year early, and I went back to college.
You got hit at Way. You weren't one of the 7 that made it out unbloodied.
No, no, no. I don't even think one of the 7 made it out. What happened at Way is that um, guys were getting wounded and just not reporting it. They would tell them to go back to the back V, and they were so afraid they were going to get medevac that they didn't. They would go around the corner, smoke a cigarette, have somebody bandage them up, and go back in. I mean, that was Way City. It was tremendous
They didn't want
guilt.
to leave.
No one wanted to leave. Yeah. Well, we all wanted to leave, but no one wanted to leave anyone behind.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we hear a lot about Vietnam veterans and how they came home. Most recent interviews that I did that where we spoke on this were Diane Carlson Evans. She was a Vietnam nurse, and Major General Aylward, who is the director of the Vietnam Commemoration, which both are episodes are in our archives here at Borne the Battle. What was your experience in coming home and taking off the uniform?
I don't care your rank. If you saw a lot of combat in any combat, Vietnam, World War II, Africa, whatever, if you saw a ton of combat, you were screwed up your first year. So I came back and I went to college, and you can imagine the college scene back. And I got 1969. So I went to college. I remember registering, and um, I went there and I couldn't find housing. I didn't get it before I went. So I pitched a tent out in the woods, and I lived in this tent for the summer. And it was a tent I could stand up in, and it had a floor. I bought it, and
Wow.
I'm like in the Hilton. I mean, I have lanterns.
Yeah, fancy compared to Contian.
Yeah. So people were saying there's this strange Vietnam guy that living out, but
John was Rambo. John was John Rambo before Rambo.
well, but Rambo knew he was Rambo. I just thought I was back as a sophomore. I didn't think it was anything strange.
Sure. No.
Yeah. I mean, this is what this was good. I remember the first time I realized that some girl
Woodstock was going on and everything, it's not, it's not too far out the norm.
Well, evidently it was, because this girl wanted to study for her history test. And she said, "You can't come to the girls' dorm. Where do you live?" And I gave her directions to this tent out about 5 miles near a creek. And she said, "I'm not going out there."
Wow. So,
but in answer to your question, we're screwed up, and it got into, most guys get into a lot of fights. They drink more than they should, and because there was no support system, now they have all this transition periods. It was like, hey, walk it off. Here's a Band-Aid. There was no transition, but you didn't have a support system, so you couldn't call up a buddy. We didn't even have phone. I didn't even know the names of some of my best friends in Vietnam. They had nicknames, or Punji State.
And then when you're in the military, you never really know the first name. It's always the last name.
Yeah, and it was difficult, to keep information. Like if you wrote something down, I mean, you're in the mud. A leech would get it, and whatever. But anyway, so we didn't have a support system. We came back. I went to college, and I didn't talk. I drank and fought, but I didn't say anything for about a year.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, today with there's so many support systems, the VA has gotten a lot better. I'm sure from the 70s, the support systems of all the VSOs and nonprofits nowadays compared to then, it's just night and day.
They blamed they couldn't separate the war from the warrior. They blamed. I remember in sociology class, I didn't think anybody knew I was a vet. Although I came back to school in crutches. And I think I said skiing accident. I don't know what I said, but and I remember them talking about Vietnam. I would get so angry. There was this guy, Pat Gallagher, if you're listening, you idiot. He would he would keep mentioning the Vietnam War, and he was an expert in it. He read it. Of course, he wasn't there. And it was so wrong. And then, but I never said anything. But I held it in so much that one night I saw him on campus, and I just went up and attacked him. Said,
Wow.
don't you ever say another word about the. I know I sound pretty bad, but you
No,
gotta understand.
no. I mean, it was something that, hey, you were there and he was not. And I can totally understand that. And, probably could have been a different way, but again, no support system, no support system. You're young and,
Wait a minute, let me get back
and,
there. It might have been
yeah,
a different way.
yeah,
Wait a minute, like discussion. We would have had a deep, meaningful discussion on the. Are you kidding me?
it wouldn't have
worked.
No, it wouldn't have worked. It's just, and you're younger, and it's just, I understand. I can understand that totally. I probably, it's completely plausible to react that way. Absolutely. It's, I know that welcome home and thank you for your service didn't come for many years for your generation.
Oh, no. Yeah,
and I also know that much of your generation leaned in to ensure that my generation wasn't treated the same way. So if there's any solace in it, the cross that your generation bore that allowed my generation to come home the way we did, I just want to say thank you for that, and that it is recognized.
Well, thank your generation, because we never heard thank you for your service until your generation. And, it seems trite and some people don't like it, but it's at least some recognition,
Yeah.
of our generation.
No, I mean, I can only imagine where, especially where, the commemoration has a great commercial where it's a Vietnam veteran at a counter. He's not getting that free cup of coffee. He's not getting recognized at all, and then there's a gentleman that's my generation comes in. He's got his Army fatigues on, and of course, as Marines, we're like, okay, Army's in a cafe with fatigues on, with camis on. What are you doing? But anyways, I digress. But he immediately gets a kid wants to take a photo with him. He gets that free cup of coffee. Everyone's thanking him. And the Vietnam veteran is just, he's looking at his old tattoo, of his unit. And I love the fact that in that commercial, the younger guy is telling the kid, hey, that's a hero too.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the way you guys should be seen and treated. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. As back then you couldn't separate the public society couldn't separate the war from the warrior. That's the main issue.
Yeah. Well, the best way I think to start doing that again is to really reach out to your generation again. And the commemoration does a really good job of that. And they're, they've gotten, I think, to 3 million Vietnam veterans. There's 3 million more to go, and we're losing over 500 a day. It's something that, definitely, if you have one in your family, or, it's something that should be recognized 100%.
Yeah. Our reunions are getting attended. Yeah. It's sad. And I know of 2 of our guys from Alpha Company that are in hospice now. And,
yeah.
You hear it all the time, not all the time, but it seems like all the time that, and we're in the bullpen. The World War II guys are pitching the last innings, and we're warming up in the bullpen. But we're happy, the ones that survive are happy to be here and see the change, the patriotism in the country.
It's good. It's good. Well, it's all, again, if there's any solace in it, it's the cross that you guys bore, and we appreciate it. Now, it seems like you took some time away from federal service for about a 10-year stretch. Was there a level of decompression there in that?
There was, but probably not intended. I worked 10 years with severely handicapped children and adults. Back then, in fact, I worked for the Association for Retarded Citizens, ARC, and I got tremendous work. When people ask between being a professor, a Marine, an FBI agent, the most rewarding time, I always say that time, because we took people out of large institutions that you wouldn't believe existed in the 60s and 70s
The
and
one
put
flew
them.
over the cuckoo's nest type of institutions.
I mean, there was a place in Pennsylvania called Polk State School and Hospital. It looked like a castle up on a hill. And I remember walking into a room once with the superintendent, and it was dark. And they had these people on fruit carts, lying down on fruit carts with blankets. And you got to know a lot of them didn't need to be there. They were pretty high functioning. And so for 10 years, what I did, my only job was to get people that didn't belong there into the community. And to this day, I keep in touch with some of them that are, have jobs and living semi-independently. I mean, it's just an amazing story.
Incredible. No,
Yeah.
I think that's part of your story that hasn't been told much. Jeez. It's so some are still around today.
Yeah. A funny story. I went back for a college reunion and had a name tag on, and a woman across, elderly woman, says, Ligato, did you work with ARC? And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, my son, Mark Fox, still talks about you. And I took Mark, was in a state center from back then. If you had a handicapped kid, you would go right from the birth hospital to an institution. I don't know why, but a lot of, they didn't even go home. And so Mark had
Wow.
been at Crescent State School and Hospital for 21 years, and I got him out, and he just thrived. I mean, anyway, that was very rewarding for me.
Sure. Sure. Um, how did you make your way to the FBI?
Well, my father was a cop, and I always wanted to be in the easiest transition. Anybody that's listening to this, if you have been in the military, the easiest transition is law enforcement because
Sure.
it's the chain of command and everything. So I wanted to be in the best. The FBI is the finest law enforcement agency on earth. And when I joined, it was all Vietnam vets, and it was an amazing apolitical. I had a partner for about 7 years, Fred Snellings, African American Marine from Georgia, state trooper, former state trooper. I had many friends, but to this day, and Fred and I did stuff after work with the families. I spent probably 10 hours, 15 hours a day with Fred for 8 or 9 years. I don't know if he was a Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. We were FBI agents. And it never dawned on us to try to fix a case, to uh, you know,
It
jam
wasn't.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
it
It was
was.
just strictly about the law.
We gathered facts, and we didn't
Yeah.
even give recommendations for prosecution. We would gather the facts and do an investigation, write it up, and give it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They would make a decision, but nowhere did we say we think this idiot should be given 10 years. We just the facts, and and agents were hard. They were good. A lot of them were former military, but even the ones that weren't, they recruited so well in the bureau. I'm so proud of my time in the FBI and the Marine Corps. Two of the finest institutions ever.
Now you worked deep under. You worked deep undercover for 8 years. Buffalo, Memphis, Cleveland, Vegas, and London. What years were you undercover?
Well, I had a 2 year stint, a 2 year stint, and a 4 year stint. And the 4 year stint was in the 90s, believe it or not. I had some in the 80s and 70s, but the mob was running wild in the 90s, the early 90s. And
So,
I spent 4 years undercover with the Italian mafia. And what happened is after about 2 years undercover, see, like other agencies like DEA, they do short-term case. They do some long-term, but they don't have the money and the manpower to do these really in-depth RICO cases. So after 2 years, I'm with these wise guys, and nobody got arrested. So I was in, and I spent 2 more years. We eventually arrested 104 people all over the world. Uh, you
so we're
know,
talking that you were involved deep undercover with the mob from like casino time frame all the way to Gotti.
yeah, I was in Vegas for a year and a half with the mafia. In Vegas was brutal, but I was undercover with a made guy, and I wasn't made, but being seen with him Vegas opened up, I'd walk in a casino and they'd say, "Hey, Mr. Calabria, here's a cigar, here's a comp. What can we get you?" And it was amazing. I didn't want to, it was a great treatment. I didn't want to come out from undercover.
Is there that thing where you're undercover and there is that kind of, do I want to, I mean, is there that line with some folks and some people undercover?
You know what? My generation, my test was, are you a bad person? I could have I could have arrested 500, because when you're portraying a bad guy and you have backstopping, I was in casinos and I was also in gentlemen's clubs, and people would come to you all the time and try to, do illegal stuff. Like I remember one guy owned a car dealership who's a good guy. I mean, he had problems, but he said, "Hey, I see so and so. Can you want to launder some money through my car dealership?" And I remember I said, "Mikey, you just had a kid. Why do you? I would chase them. I wouldn't write it up. I would. I mean, you could, if you wanted, you could have. I could have arrested hundreds of people, but what I did is, in answer to your question, who was bad? Who, when they got up in the morning, was a criminal? Not, I mean, that was their 24 hours. How they were going to get over, and violence. If they were into violence, I would.
Whether they had a badge or not. Gotcha.
Yeah.
John Ligato, I just got to say, your name sounds like an undercover name already. Like, I feel like you didn't even have to have a pseudo name. You were kind of already, you got that name, man. It's like, it works for that. 8 years is a long time. How were you able to stay undercover for that long? And again, you said you did 2, 2, and a 4, but how were you able to do 8 years and not crack, which under what was probably a lot of pressure? I mean, like Way, if you're that deep undercover, there must have been stuff that you witnessed that would have made some other folks say, "Okay, I want out."
Well, that's an interesting. I get that asked, and it becomes normal. You got to understand. I grew up among Italians in South Philly. I grew up with these guys that became wise guys, so I knew the culture. I didn't have to learn it, and I felt comfortable. After a while, you cannot withstand, whether it's combat or undercover. You can't maintain a sort of tenseness or fear for long, because they'll smell it. And after a while, I didn't. It was more natural for me to get up and go have coffee with wise guys than it would have been to go in the FBI office. And sometimes the FBI office was more dangerous than being with the wise guys.
Sure.
Don't shake your head.
I work in DC. I can understand that. I can understand that this whole city. I'm going to ask you the same question I had about Way. Was there a time when you were undercover that you ever thought, "I'm not getting out of this alive"?
Oh yeah, my apartment was bagged. I got
What's
they'll
bagged
test you. They ransacked it looking for wires or something. And here's the other thing: you don't have with the mafia, you obviously don't have your badge, but you don't have a gun. The mafia doesn't like you to carry weapons. Only certain people, or unless they're at war with another family. But mostly so. You are living with guys like, say, for example, in the Marine Corps, somebody might not like you, and they're going to fight you, they're going to hit you, you're going to be in those type of interpersonal relations that blow up, and so they would have when you first get there, they would test you. They have a big guy come up and try to screw with you, cops would brace us against the wall and smack us around, you didn't have a badge or gun, and you couldn't call timeout like they do in the movie. So there were times, guns and, I mean, thumping, people, and being tested by other wise guys,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And I'm small. I'm a small guy.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's some things that you witnessed that are like, okay, that could be me or something.
I don't, Hey, yeah. I don't say nothing. You know what I mean?
I hear you. While you were in all this, Did you keep in contact with anybody from Way or from your old
No,
life or
no, no.
no?
No, you have a contact agent with the FBI, and this was before automatic checking. And they get your paycheck to your wife, and you meet them occasionally, and you give them reports, or you give them the status of the case, and that's your lifeline back to the FBI. It's called a contact agent.
Interesting. So interesting. 10th and Wolf. It's a 2006 independent movie with some big names attached to it. James Marsden from X-Men and Westworld, Giovanni Ribisi, Brad Renfro, Dennis Hopper, Brian Dennehy, Val Kilmer. I never heard this movie until I did some research before this interview, and you were in it as well.
Yeah, I get
Apparently,
blown
this
up.
was what's that?
I get blown up, but go ahead.
Oh, gotcha.
The director was an Academy Award winning director,
Yeah.
Bobby Maresca, and he said to me, John, this is the first time in a movie I've been in or directed or that a guy gets blown up with a grenade that was actually blown up with a grenade. He thought that was funny.
Interesting. The movie's loosely based on your time undercover, with the premise that a former South Philly kid comes home after war and tangles with the mob boss who was instrumental in leaving for the service in the first place. That was that second part, the mob boss part. Is there any truth to that, or is it more fiction?
There's truth throughout that movie. Like, for example, the movie is also based on cousins. And I did have a cousin that was arrested by the FBI, his cousin from his maternal side, ends up being the underboss of the Philadelphia mob. So I was, that's what the movie was loosely based on. And there's so much stuff that didn't get in that movie. Yeah, but it was a wonderful time. I had to go out drinking with Tommy Lee 2 nights. Not Tommy Lee Jones, but Tommy Lee, the musician,
the drummer. He was in the film.
He played a wise guy.
Oh, far out.
And what a nice guy. But after the first night, drinking with him, I came to the set the next day. I'm like, he said, "You're going to go out tonight?" I said, "Get the heck out of here. I can't keep."
So, was there ever a real life Donnie Brasco situation in your career?
Well, I mean, Joe was under 6 years straight. He was the closest ever to becoming me. They were going to make him. I was an earner. They liked me because I earned money for them. I bought drugs from them. I bought guns, but I also had stolen goods. I had watches, in other words. So I got away with stuff because they made money off me. Joe was more down, in a different part of that. I mean, I hung out with him every day, but he was the greatest undercover agent ever. I mean, we all think to go undercover, you got to think you're good. But I was undercover with him. I'll never forget this. I'm driving in the front seat, and he's in the back with some made guys, and I'm just listening to Joe, and he'd say something. Boy, is that good! I wish I would have thought of that. And he was just a Michael Jordan, and I was handing the ball off to him. And
very good. Now, did you guys know you were undercover together?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Very good. Very good. Wow, incredible. So you were then in FBI Special Operation Group as a pilot, Russia, Estonia, Budapest. Seems like you stayed in the old Soviet bloc. What were the nature of those missions?
Well, I didn't fly over there, but I mean, I went diplomatic training under the guys, and it was amazing. I did shake hands with Putin, but I was with a lot of field grade officers, and we met with a lot of former KGB and GRU, which they weren't former really.
Are you ever former?
Well, it was fascinating meeting with these guys. Of course, they had our luggage bag. They had microphones in our rooms, and so I would go into Joe's room and I'd say, "Joe," I says, "You got the plutonium?" He said, "No, you got the plutonium." I got the anthrax,
Messing with the microphones. It's hilarious. Yeah. It's hilarious. You've since retired. You retired in 2003. It's funny. I knew, again, I didn't know that part of your post career was, in addition to being a professor, being an author.
Yeah, I love the word. I love writing, and I wrote mostly nonfiction. I've wrote two nonfiction books. I like writing fiction, but my fiction is about 75% nonfiction. But I enjoy writing. I enjoy when I'm writing, and I'm writing a book now. It's like when you're reading a good book. I can't wait to get to it. And when we're finished here, I'll go back to writing. I just enjoy it. Enjoy the writing part more than any other part of the book process. Promoting it, the editing, the interview parts. I'd rather write.
I, I haven't read as much as I should read. You got the common notes reading list, and you have all these reading lists. And I probably haven't been as much of an avid reader as I was back when I was in middle school. And I was a big reader. I mean, I read books like that, but, I do appreciate the medium because, again, I'm a gamer. I watch movies. There's other mediums, but I think what I think people need to appreciate is the fact that a lot of those mediums come from writing, come from a written word of just great stories. So we have a lot of writers in our archives. Is there, and I ask them a lot, I ask a lot of them this question. If a veteran wants to start writing and wants to get into the writing world and into publishing, you got self-publishing, you got other ways to do it nowadays. What's one thing that they should know they want to get into that world?
Well, you got to write. And I say this because I meet so many people and say, I was going to write a book, or I started to write a book. And you got to write. And you got to write for the love of writing. Because if you think you're going to get published, and that's the reason you're writing, writing is a catharsis. I mean, you create, and you got to love writing. I mean, you got to love writing because, it's a solitary, occupation. But write every day. I hear I can't have time every day. Yeah, you got time. Even if you write 20 minutes, write. And uh, write in your voice. I see too many writers try to put too many adjectives in a sentence. Like if you were going to say, hey, drop the gun, you don't have to put, he said eloquently, hey, in a British accent, drop the, just put, hey, drop the gun. We use too many words. It depends on what you're writing now. If you're writing dialogue, if you're writing dialogue, you write like people talk, and write from the heart. Write what you know too, because unless you're writing textbooks, if you try to write from somebody else's expertise, as you know, as a reader, people read that and say that's BS, or that we don't talk like that, or that could never happen. Like a classic example is guys that write military and they'll use latrine for head, and doesn't that drive you crazy, or fatigue?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. So
same in films too, when it's just the wrong uniform or the wrong rank, or absolutely. It drives every military. I think it drives every veteran crazy, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
In writing and film and any medium. Absolutely. Which one do you prefer more? Dale Dye, a former guest, he's written fiction and nonfiction. Which do you prefer, writing fiction or nonfiction?
Definitely fiction, because you don't have to work as hard researching. Let me give you an example. I wrote the book Gunny, right? You know that I'm going to tell you something that you'll be shaking your head. I wrote the book The Gunny, which is nonfiction. It's about guys. It's about way. If I put anything in that book that wasn't accurate, those guys would kill me on social media. They'd call me. So you have to be so exact, and which is hard. It takes more time to write
Sure.
nonfiction. But you know yourself. You read something and say that's BS. That's not right. Or
gotta be accurate. Yeah, absolutely. I know that in my field for sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. John, what's one thing that you learned during your time in the military that you apply to what you do today in life?
that if you keep at something, uh, there are many ways. And there's a saying in the Marine Corps: adapt, improvise, and overcome. And I use that in FBI cases. A lot of people in law enforcement are linear thinkers. They just move straight. I found that there's so many ways to get to the finish line in anything. And again, with the Gunny's 13-year odyssey with the medal, I'd get an obstacle, and at the time I got the obstacle, it looked unattainable. It looked like I can't overcome this obstacle. And I would give up, and then I'd get mad and say, no, I can never. And I would think, well, do something. You know what I mean? If you do something and you're moving and you're talking to people and you're trying to overcome it and you appeal decisions, that's the other, I'm not taking that. You can accomplish almost anything you want.
Very good. Very good. John, is there a veteran nonprofit or a veteran in your community or in the veteran community whom you've worked with or that you'd like to mention?
Yeah. You mean organizations?
Yeah. Or a veteran or, either one, either a nonprofit or a veteran in the community, either one.
I'm up at the base all the time. I worked a lot of years with Hope for the Warriors. I did charity events for them. And another great organization is the Semper-Fi Fund. I didn't know much about that, but they're more directly involved. Like, for example, if the hurricane here, if a veteran lost a roof, they give money for a roof. It wasn't like counseling or anything. It was like, here, you need a roof. Here's the money.
Shoot, John, I think we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that I've missed or haven't asked that you think is important to share?
No, just so, you married 50 years and you ask questions about how it's tough. Well, my wife made it easier than it should have been. And it'll be 51 years in another month or so. But yeah.
Congratulations.
That's the key too. I mean, you could imagine we have a lot of undercovers and a lot of Marines deployed that are having trouble back home, and it affects their performance. But if you're good to go at home, that emboldens you. That really does. It makes you bulletproof to a degree. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. So, I got to ride or die myself,
Yeah, you're lucky then, because a lot of people don't.
Yeah. Got to definitely recognize the wives. To anybody that's listening to this, do you have any parting words, parting shots, parting advice that maybe I haven't brought up yet that you think you'd like to share with anybody that's out there listening?
Yeah, just during this COVID thing, let me give you some advice. Get out of the house. I mean, do something. Do something that you want to do. I don't care how weird it might seem. If you want to get into spiritualism, you want to go to seances, you want to volunteer time, you want to do it. Don't be afraid of what people think or say. Do what you always wanted to do.
We gotta get them one way or the other. Machine gunner, fight bullets fly, day and night rain. Semper-Fi till we die, another campaign. My desk is a rock where the drug lords cut up millions. My pen is a 7.62 round that'll cut them down in an instant. Point, click, pull the trigger to the tune of falling brass. Full benefits and a purple heart and a Russian-made bullet in my bag. Raining down lead, punching that clock. Get 'em boys, I'm laying down cover. Machine gunner, fight bullets fly, day and night rain. Semper-Fi, do or die, another campaign. Here we go, lock and load, 0331, lug 1,000 rounds, and I ain't bringing back one.